Well, hi, everybody, and welcome to the Buckeye Report from the Woody Hayes Athletic Center in Columbus, where Ohio State just had a chance to visit with the media. Ryan Day in his normal Tuesday press conference, the Buckeyes and the Michigan State Spartans officially hit the halfway point of the regular season. I'm Brendan Gulick. This is Andrew Lind. Appreciate your coverage subscriptions for us. We certainly like doing these videos after Tuesday press conferences. And we'll certainly bring you stuff tomorrow night when we get a chance to hear from a bunch of the guys as well. Buckeyes Now on Sports Illustrated through Fan Nation. We're part of the Sports Illustrated media group. Okay, we talked, I thought, at a press conference today, it had kind of a weird vibe at first. It was like, where's this going? And then it got really lighthearted really fast, and there were a lot of laughs in the room. And I think maybe the biggest takeaway I had from the entire press conference, we talked with Ryan Day, Jim Knowles, and Tony Alford. There were exceptionally few questions about the Michigan State Spartans. Right now, all of the attention is on Ohio State, and it's not really a whole lot on what's coming up this week.
Yeah, I find it very similar to last week against Rutgers. You know, there went mostly press conferences without hearing a single thing about the Scarlet Knights, and it was more of the same this week. And really, I think it's just kind of that focus that Ohio State has, you know, on itself, and knowing that, you know, if they do their job and do what they're supposed to do, then at the end of the day, they're going to win the game. And I think that the more notable part of it was just this happens to be the first time that they're playing somebody on the road, as opposed to having the first 5 games at home. And yeah, I mean, I think it's just a mix of one. Michigan State has really kind of underperformed this year after being, you know, 9-1, top 10 going into last year's meeting, and then this year they started out 2-0 and have lost 3 straight games and haven't really looked competitive in any way. So yeah, I mean, it's really just a matter of, you know, knowing Ohio State's another massive favorite again this week, and really just as long as the Buckeyes do what they're supposed to, then there shouldn't be any issues moving to 6-0.
Michigan State is actually third last. I think there are 131 teams that play FBS football, and they are 129th in time of possession through the first 5 games. They have struggled to get the ball, and they've struggled to be competitive when they have it. Their offense has not been great so far. It kind of makes me wonder how much of that Kenneth Walker effect was maybe more overwhelming last year than we even realized at the time, because they certainly had a good team last year. Ryan Day was asked a couple questions about Michigan State, and he did point out, look, we don't really care about the rankings. There are a huge number of guys still on this roster that were on last year's team when they were in the top 10, and we're treating this like it's a top 10 game this week. I think that's a kind way of looking at it, but I think he's got a team that's probably a bit better.
Well, I do think that the one thing that really stood out to me last year is, and you kind of mentioned it, the Kenneth Walker impact, and just maybe the teams that they played earlier in the year. You know, the games that they lost last year were to Purdue, Ohio State, and Pittsburgh. And those were all teams that could throw the ball around, and
Yes,
obviously that was when they lost. And you know, I don't think that their defensive backs and their secondary as a whole has gotten any better this year. You know, we saw it against Washington when they went on the road and lost their first game. You know, Michael Penix just threw the ball all over the field, and you know that you kind of expect the same thing. Obviously, Ohio State's been playing really well offensively with Mayan Williams running the ball and that kind of stuff, but at the same time, this is going to be one of those games where you're like, okay, you know, CJ's been kind of having like average games, if you will. At least last week, it was just kind of like he just showed up and did his job. It wasn't anything, you know, spectacular or anything like that. But then this week, I think it's one of those games where you're like, okay, he just threw for 6 touchdowns, 400 yards, and you know, we're back in that Heisman front seat. You know,
I actually asked Ryan Day point blank. I said, hey, look, stats aside, when you watched tape on CJ Stroud the last 2 weeks, how did you evaluate it? And he basically said it was fine. You know, there were no glaring mistakes. CJ largely took care of the ball. He guided an offense that scored 101 points the last 2 weeks. You're not going to ding a kid for that. But we have seen at his peak a higher ceiling than what he's shown the last couple weeks. I think that's caught some people's attention. To your point about Michael Penix, who obviously used to be at Indiana and is now at Washington, if I'm trying to defend Michigan State a little bit, I mean, that kid's been really good. He actually leads the country in passing yards. Penix has been awesome. So maybe Michigan State's just gotten a little bit of a tougher draw there. Their pass defense hasn't been great. Even beyond that, though, I think they're like 115th in the country in pass defense. So look, there are certainly some deficiencies on this Michigan State team, and it's probably not lining up well with them right now, because where they are particularly deficient, the Buckeyes are particularly efficient. And you know, I don't want to predict a blowout, but it sure feels like this is a game Ohio State should handle.
Yeah, and I mean, I would put a little more more emphasis on the fact that, you know, they did play a tough Washington team on the road and stuff, but at the same time, Washington went on the road last Friday and got beat at UCLA. So I don't necessarily know that, you know, Washington is this great team that Michigan State just happened to run into, and, you know, that's why they lost. And I think that, you know, really the biggest struggle that Ohio State might have is just the fact that it is the first game on the road. You know, you learn your checks, young players being in that environment. Michigan State isn't necessarily an easy place to play, despite the fact that Ohio State hasn't lost there, you know, since 1999. So, I mean, it's been
It's been a long time,
23 years. So it's been a while. But yeah, I mean, it's just kind of, you know, it's a hard place to play for other teams. I mean, Michigan goes there every other year, and, you know, that feels like maybe their most difficult game when they don't come to Ohio State. So yeah, I mean, it's just a matter of, you know, handling that environment on the road and learning from it. And at the end of the day, as long as you get out of that with a win, that's kind of just been the thing, you know, throughout this year. It's get on to the next one. As long as you do that, you'll be where you want to be at the end of the year.
A little more focus on today. Ryan was his normal self. He answered a lot of nice questions. I didn't think anything was really jump off the page worthy. But when he turned the microphone over to Jim Knowles, we had a few laughs because he was asked a couple of different fun questions, including one about Tommy Eichenberg. And basically, like, look, how fast have you had a guy pick up your defense? And has anyone done it faster than Tommy has? And by the way, is he more communicative with you than he is with us in the media? And Knowles was hilarious. He basically said, no, sometimes he just grunts. Yeah, you know, in the wrong spot, in the right spot, whatever. And it's funny because it's pretty authentic. There's nothing made up about that. But yeah. I mean, God, Tommy is playing right now at an All-American level.
It's kind of like if you, and I want to make sure I, you know, preface this with this is as nice as possible, but it's like almost putting a caveman in a football uniform and telling him to go out there and just do what he's supposed to do. And that's kind of how he plays. It's like he just, you know, brings that toughness and gets the job done. And yeah, I mean, he's not very communicative with us in press conference or anything, but, you know, we at least don't get grunts. So I mean, we get like 3 or 4 word sentences, but yeah, I mean, really that just speaks to the kind of toughness though that this defense has really, you know, lacked in recent years. And as long as he's doing what he's supposed to and learning and relaying that, you know, no matter how many times he has to grunt to other people to get them to do what they're supposed to do, like as long as it gets done, that's all that matters.
The reality is he's playing faster than he did last year. And I think the freedom with which Jim Knowles is giving his players as a whole and the aggressiveness that he wants his linebackers to play with, it's kind of fitting Tommy's style, where last year I think he just got a little bit too used in a way where he was basically just an inside run defender. And this year he's beating guys to the boundary repeatedly. Steel Chambers had an unbelievable game on Saturday. I think it was his best game as a linebacker at Ohio State. And if you see those two guys emerging together, you're going to be able to negate looking forward something like what Penn State does in the run game, where that is clearly their strength. You look at teams that wanted to run the ball on the Buckeyes last year, they could. This year, it's going to be a lot harder with the way these linebackers are playing.
Yeah, and I think it really just kind of goes back to just freeing them up and putting them in situations to succeed. Because if you're not wondering why you're in this position, or you're not worrying about what your role is, you just know what you're supposed to do, then you're just going to go out there and do it. And I think that's really the biggest thing for them, you know, and just as the defense as a whole, it doesn't seem like they're, you know, thinking through things or wondering why the call is being, you know, what call is being made and why it's being made and those kind of things. So it's just a matter of, you know, putting them in a position to succeed. And then they talk about it, you know, during the week, as long as they practice and, you know, get those things during the week, when it comes to game day, that they don't have anything to worry about.
I thought it was a good conversation with Coach Knowles. He is pleased. He's not surprised, but he's also not satisfied. I think he made that pretty clear. He likes where they're at. He thinks this defense should be substantially better. He doesn't like the fact that they're a number 11 ranked defense or whatever they are right now. He said, that's not our goal. We need to be better than that.
Yeah. And he was talking about third down specifically on that, because, you know, that's where they rank on third downs. But yeah, it's just I think that mindset of wanting to be the best is what kind of separates him, you know, from other coordinators. Because, you know, yeah, top 10 defense, 11th on third down, those are all great, especially compared to the last couple of years. And, you know, that's kind of what fans have wanted. We've always kind of said, it's like if they have a top 30 defense with this offense, they're going to win the national championship. And those are all great things to have in mind, but better the defense is and the better they play, the easier it makes it on the offense. So, there's a difference between being 5th and 11th. And I think that those little things are, being 1st and 5th, like those are all things to improve upon and get better at. And the better you are in those situations, the better the team will be as a whole.
Let's go to Tony Alford for a minute. A lot of good questions about his running back room. Obviously, we've seen some real depth in that room. There were plenty of comments about Mayan and the way that, he's put together a really, really nice season. Exclamation point on last week for sure. I thought he was quick to point out and said, I want to quash any conversation that anybody's had about Trey not having a good year. He said he thinks Trey's had a great year. And he's in particular, he's pleased with the way he's grown as a blocker. I think that's pretty evident on tape if you watch for that. Dallin Hayden is getting opportunities and he's flashing because of it. Obviously, Evan Pryor's been hurt. But all in all, Tony Alford is really, really happy with the way his room is producing.
Yeah, and I think when it comes to Henderson specifically, if you're not getting as many carries or, having as many long plays as he did last year, fans kind of notice that and say, okay, well, he's not playing as well. And that necessarily isn't the case, because if you look at, just his yards per carry, his blocking, as Alford mentioned, those things have improved. So it's like, you're not seeing the game breaking play, but that doesn't mean that he's, any worse of a player or anything like that. When in reality, like Alford said, that he's improving this year and becoming a better all around player. And then it's very easy when you play the same position as somebody else to be overshadowed by that. In the same way that, Henderson overshadowed everybody last year against Tulsa, and everybody was just on the Travion Henderson train after that. Mayan's kind of done the same thing in this last game. It's hard for anybody else to compare it to somebody, scoring 5 touchdowns. So, yeah, I think it's just a matter of him, coming out and saying, like, Henderson is doing everything I want him to. That's obviously a good thing.
I want to go back to Ryan for just a quick second and talk special teams, because there are not a lot of things that statistically Michigan State has done well this year. I think that's objectively fair. They think very highly of Michigan State in this building. I think maybe some of us in the media think that this is going to be a lopsided game, and it might be. But Michigan State has the best punter in the country this year right now. He's averaging over 53 yards a punt, and that's both a compliment to your punter and to your coverage unit. And obviously Ohio State has looked a little weary at times this year fielding punts, and again that reared its ugly head last weekend. Maybe it was because it was so windy, but obviously you turn the ball over in special teams, that stinks. And I asked Ryan Day about, hey, how much time and attention are you guys paying to that this week to make sure that that's not a problem? And he was quick to say, look, we have got to be really, really solid in special teams. He said Emeka is a very good punt returner. We have a ton of faith in him. He's going to get it figured out. It was obviously a bad moment. But we've seen a few times this year where Emeka's actually fielded a punt where he looks like he's underneath it, and then all of a sudden he starts turning and running and catching it backwards, and that's not how it's drawn up.
Not necessarily ideal, but he did kind of acknowledge today that they have to find that sweet spot really, because on the new turf it wants to bounce, and
Right.
If it bounces in front of you, well, you're worrying about the people coming at you, but then you have to find the ball and do all of that. And I think it's just ideally you don't want him to have to catch it over his shoulder, but at the same time, 99% of the time, other than when it was really windy and all of that, he's going to catch that. And that's why they put that faith in him to go back there and do it. But I do think that, that could be something that they struggle with this weekend, because Michigan State, I don't know what the weather's going to be like. I haven't looked at this point, but, it can get windy there.
Sure.
That's going to be the first time this season that they're playing on grass, which I think is, kind of notable in that, maybe you plant differently or, those kind of things. So, yeah, and Michigan State always seems to be the game. I remember a couple of years ago, Drew Chrisman had a couple punts that were inside the 10.
Did.
So, that's kind of one of those games that is kind of defined by special teams. So I think that that could end up playing a role.
Let's kind of wrap on the injury front. I know you're going to write about injury updates over on BuckeyesNow.com. I was a little surprised there weren't questions, unless I blanked. I didn't really hear any questions about Tanner McAllister or Tyleek Williams, who got banged up last weekend. So I'm just going to kind of trust my eyes. They were on the sideline. They looked to be okay, even though they didn't go back in the game. I don't think that's a long-term deal with either of those two. Ryan Day did acknowledge that he expects Travion Henderson to be able to play this week. I think they're still handling this whole Jackson Smith and Jigba thing on literally a day-by-day basis. I know they want him to play.
Mm-hmm.
They've made it clear they want him on the field. He's frustrated not to be out there. Given that Ohio State has played pretty darn well without him, and you've got a bye week built in, personally, it wouldn't surprise me if he doesn't play this week. I hope he does, but I'm not sure.
Well, I do think that grass might have a role in it too,
Sure.
just because, like I said, it's difficult to plant, and depending on how you plant and that kind of stuff could rear, that injury again. And I just think that, getting him healthy for the back half of the season after that off week is obviously going to be key. But I'm really interested to see whether or not Cam Brown plays, because I think that, just them continuing to build confidence in the young guys has been great. Jair Brown and J.K. Johnson. But at the same time, like, Cameron Brown came back for a reason. He came back for this 5th season for a reason, and to be a very important part of that defense. And, I know Ryan Day said today that he's really frustrated by that and, wants to really get back. So I think that, if he puts in that hard, that week of work and gets back out there, and, he can only improve the defense. Like, I don't think they're going to be any worse if he gets out there. So, yeah, I mean, it's just important to get healthy on all fronts, have that off week, and then you got the 6-game stretch to end it.
And lastly, Jordan Hancock is back practicing. It sounds like he's close. It also sounds like he probably wouldn't play this weekend just because they know they've got an off week the following week. That's kind of how I interpreted that. Yep. And they think Denzel Burke is still a guy that they're going to lean on. They said he missed a lot of reps in camp when he was dealing with an injury. It's been a tough road for him, and he's played better than some of the lowlights he's had this year. Obviously, there's a lot of people in Buckeye Nation that are hoping Denzel plays better this week.
Yeah, and I'm going to go on record right now and say that, I understand why they're doing it, because he is an extremely talented player, and they know that one day, like, this faith that they have in him getting through those struggles is going to help, in a way that, he's going to have a critical interception in a game that everybody's going to be like, well, why is Denzel Burke out there? That's exactly why. So, yeah, it's just a matter of you want to have faith in people through those struggles, because in the end, it's going to pay off for you. And we're going to see that late in the season.
No doubt about it. Buckeyes are 5-0. They've looked awfully good. They've got the number 1 ranked scoring offense in the country. They've got a top 3 total offense in the country. These are things we certainly expected coming into the year, but it's the defense that has looked perhaps most impressive so far here through the first 5 weeks of the season. So the Buckeyes are getting ready for Michigan State. They'll have 2 hard practices, as they always do, Tuesday and Wednesday. We'll be sure to bring you the latest here from the Woody Hayes Athletic Center if there's breaking news along the way this week. For Andrew Lind, I'm Brendan Gulick. Thanks for hanging out with us on the Buckeye Report. We'll see you over real soon on BuckeyesNow.com.